Acts of the Apostles 37, the apostasy of Europe and the generation of May 68, Catholic first steps. Why does God allow apostasy occur from Europe and from the whole West? From the 1950s and from the 1960s, religious practice has begun to collapse in Europe, and an entire generation who was born in 1945 in the baby boom began to no longer hate nor need God, or even to the point of despising this religion. Some have said to themselves it comes from Vatican Council too. As it changed the liturgy, people are falling away. This is an analytical error. There is, however, a concomitance with Vatican Council too, but the cause is elsewhere. Why does the generation of 1968, because they were 20 years old in May 68, react in such a manner? Because Europe for 50 years since the 1914 war had committed suicide by giving themselves the idols, the values, noble values, like the love of the fatherland, the love of the authority of the father, duty, sacrifice, but values exalted like idols to the point of sacrificing entire generations, so that had traumatized the generations into such conditions as suicide. The popes had denounced such idolatry, and not only Pope Benedict XV had cursed the war in 1914. Pope Pius XII, let's not talk about it, with the war of 1939, his encyclical, which is called Mit brennender Sorge, who warned as early in 1938. It had been published by Pius XI, but had been written by Pius XII, who warned against the occurrence of Nazism. The next generation, in a legitimate revolt, would sweep away all this dirty water and the baby along with it. This means rejecting by a violent reaction, which was well understand, the errors of their fathers by adopting the exactly opposite values. Their fathers had been racist, they were anti-racist. Their fathers were for the sacrifice, they were for spontaneous pleasure. Their fathers loved the fatherland. The fatherland was to become fascist. You had to love your region or Europe or the world rather than your own land. Their fathers were Catholic or Protestant, so they became humanists and atheists. And so we see in one generation the transmission had not been successful from one generation to the next, and Europe had been losing its Christian faith in a while. One can therefore wonder in church history, why had God allowed this? What is certain is that in the face of such an apostasy, the Catholic Church observed and had been deeply upset once again by looking at how much it had been striving with efforts to proclaim the gospel and that nothing had remained. The reality is that God allowed all the laws of sociology to be made so that each generation, according to its freedom, lived to the end the fruit of what it may have considered to be good, of what in fact they were often very proud. Result, just as their fathers, by dint of adoring the fatherland, had killed themselves in the war, in the same way they arrived at old age without having faith, without having hope, and with anguishes which had been increasing because life had no longer meaning. When they were young, they danced to magnificent music. When they get old, they were alone with aborted children, many with divorces and extraordinary material comfort. This is how this anguished generation arrived at death without God in anguish, but at the present surprise at the hour of death to be welcomed by this Christ full of goodness, who did not hold it against them, who made themselves their lawyer, who tried to explain their revolt, then fed with anguished by these long periods of death without God, they rushed towards by God, by loving Him, by loving very much the one who had forgiven them so much. We may therefore say that all of God's consentments once again are well explained, because earthly life is only a passage where we learn such things, but that the real life is on the other side. Why is it probable that after the departure of the generation of May 1968, who had apostatized, there may well be a powerful renewal of the Catholic faith throughout the Western world? We can predict this by a simple analysis, almost philosophical, knowing that obviously this renewal will necessarily be accompanied by the Holy Spirit. The reason is deep. The generation of 1968 had created a world where we had lived without God, a world where children have great freedom, extraordinary wealth, and no goals, no deep meaning in life. It's an anxious generation of freedom and nothing to associate with it. Mankind is made like that. He is made for the true God. He is made to answer three questions. Where do I come from? Where do I go after death? And who am I deeply? Result: after a period of spiritual famine since the Second World War, there will inevitably be a renewal, and this renewal may well be initiated by causes that are primarily human, if only because the generation of May 1968, in its naivety, had given up on the very idea of our European root, of our European culture, allowing Islam to impose itself with firmness and pride, and so that the next generation naturally may seek to find its roots. When searching for its roots, necessarily may find the Christian roots of Europe. And however, it turns out that the Christian roots of Europe are not only pilgrimages, forgiveness music. This is a deep faith, extremely intelligent, mystical, and at the same time very social, something that possesses content. This generation that follows that of May 68 did not believe in it, however, because the generation of May 1968 transmitted something childish within catechism when they had omitted, in fact, that it may well have been the most intelligent religion in the world, according to Saint Thomas Aquinas. The result: it had been carried by the Holy Spirit. It is foreseeable that surprisingly, and in a few years, a few decades, the Christian roots of Europe had been recovered, but in such a powerful way that we must expect that it will also be accompanied by fundamentalist abuses, but those who may go to extremes in revenge when compared to the previous generation. This is a natural phenomenon. This occurrence is similar to a swinging pendulum. The excess of liberties of one generation followed by generations of tendencies to excessive virtues. The world in such aspects may never change because mankind remains as mankind.